Spitfires. So it's a fine side, it's what they basically, most of their fun, they can break the time, so that's what you do is not bad, that's the better song. Yeah. Join yeah, now from the top of the models, my remake comes forward for mine, and I got they were just pretty top to do everything, they couldn't work, and I did
Three Spitfire 1As of the type that flew during the battle, and the Hispano-Bouchon playing the Messerschmitt Bf 109 will have pyrotechnics and a classic dogfight. Then trainers, wartime and post-war, two Tiger Moths, Miles Magister and Chipmunk. A solo display then from the Commonwealth Boomerang over from the Warbird display team at Antwerp. We were to have seen the Yak 3 flying, but operational reasons unfortunately precluding that. That is followed by the fighter collection with a three-ship of the Curtiss P-40F and Hawk 75 and the Grumman Wildcat. And then the two Bristol... A lot has been written about the RAF during the Battle of France itself. And it was something on which your father had very definite opinions, didn't he?
Well, as far as I can comment on it, I try to comment using his words.
Yes, of course.
I wasn't there, right? And so I've tried to encapsulate what he felt. The war basically for them started on the 10th of May.
Yes.
Yeah, and started with a vengeance, with many patrols. and they were learning how to combat the enemy. I mean, the tactics at that time were very new and not necessarily great for that war, after the war or whatever. But what happened then was, of course, he got stuck in France, and he came back with the refugees, walking with a gashed leg, you know, with a parachute over his shoulder. And it took him 3 days to get back to the squadron, 65 Squadron, which was in North France.
Yes.
85, what am I talking about?
Yes.
And stopping by eating what the refugees were doing. And he was reported to the army that the German army had crossed the Meuse and they wouldn't believe it.
Yes.
So it was very sort of un-21st century. I mean, we forget that they didn't cut out the piece of metal in his leg with a penknife.
Yes.
And Dad sort of just talked about it as if he just ordered a cup of tea. Very pragmatic. But he got back, I think on the 14th, to find that all the company records had been blown up, and half the people that he knew had either left the...
From a nearby lightship. Others weren't so lucky, and one of his great squadron mates died that day. And if I may read this extract of that, he wrote, "If anything affected me seriously, it was that. He was a wonderful person. I still say it, I still think it. You just did not believe. No, he was going to turn up. Something had happened, but he was going to turn up. But he never did, of course." It's one of those reminders that these were young men with feelings for all sorts of people around them.
Indeed, there was a hierarchy, obviously, within squadrons, and the squadron leader was like a head boy, if you wish, right? And leading the wing was a kind of prefect, and Dad was junior, right? And they did look up to them with awe. And Dickie Lee was an incredibly versatility of the Hurricane.
Yes.
And in order to do that, he flew inverted or upside down around the air. He was one, you know, very difficult to shoot down an aeroplane. It's kind of shooting, dogfighting at 300 miles an hour in 3.5 seconds to line up the aeroplane and shoot him down.
Church, having made a head-on attack against some Dornier Dole 215, which had a fighter escort, and he wrote, remembering that the enemy was shooting at parachutists over England, and the cloud tops were about 8,000 feet, I did a delayed drop as far as the cloud before opening my parachute. I landed safely in 60 marches. It took nearly 2 days before the pain completely disappeared, but then, straight back in the saddle, 31st of August, he damaged the Messerschmitt BF-1090 and never got off.
And the searchers
Off there, the later model of the Duxford, the Douglas Good, Bomberline, came back to the UK when France fell in June, and that aircraft went on to fly in the Battle of Britain as well, a veteran of both the Battle of France and the Battle of Britain. He saw his first combat just 2 days after the battle was officially begun on the 12th combat. He then went to number 71 Eagle Squadron at Fleet and later at Mastership here in Switch. This final RAF assignment was an operational training unit before his RAF career ended, and then went on into the Soviet Air. Under then Lee. Much later, he was returned to flight in the year 2000, one of the most polished outline flight which he returned to flight, and then came back to Europe with the airship. Today owned by Jennifer Taylor, and operated in memory of Taylor and Dawson Boats. Those then are 8 Hurricanes. Western airfield. The most Hurricanes ever flown in the modern era, we believe, so we can't be entirely certain, since the early 1950s up until now has been 7. We hope it's no better than that by 1. Here it is, the Duxford A26C Invader. Along among other locations, and then came Korea. Or included this very one. It was lucky during that time to survive a direct hit in the bomb bay from flak.
reported this to our squadron leader. He replied, "Go after them with your section." So I led my section of aircraft round towards the bomb. We chased hard after them, but when we were about a mile behind, we saw the 88 fly straight into the squadron Spitfire. I used to fly a Spitfire myself, and I guess it was turns, 3 jumps. I must confess I was very disappointed, for I had never fired at a Hun in my life and was longing to have a crack at it. So we swung round again and started to climb up to 18,000 feet over Southampton to rejoin our squadron. I was still a long way from the squadron when suddenly, very close in rapid succession, I heard 4 big bangs. They were the loudest noises I had ever heard, and they had been made by 4 cannon shells from Messerschmitt 110 hitting my machine. The first shell tore through the hood over my cockpit and sent splinters into my left eye. One splinter, I discovered later, nearly severed my eye. I couldn't see through that eye for blood. The second cannon shell struck my spare petrol tank and set it on fire. The third shell crashed into the cockpit and tore off my right trouser leg. The fourth shell struck the back of my left shoe. It shattered the heel of the shoe and made quite a mess of my left foot. But I didn't know anything about that pilot until then. Anyway, the effect of these 4 shells was to make me dive away to the right to avoid further shells. Then I started cursing myself for my carelessness. What a fool I'd been, I thought. What a fool. I was just thinking of jumping out when suddenly a Messerschmitt 110 whizzed underneath me and got right in my gunsight. Fortunately, no damage had been done to my windscreen before sight. When I was chasing the junkers, I could switch everything on, so everything was fit for the fight. I was going like mad. Turning and deterring it away from my fire, trying to throttle right over. Both of us must have been doing about 400. We went down together in the dive. First he turned left, then right, then left and right again. He did 3 turns to the right and finally a 4th turn to the left. I remember shouting out loud when I first saw him, "I'll teach you some manners, you Hun." And I shouted other things as well. I knew I was getting him nearly all the time I was firing. By this time, it was pretty hot inside my machine in the third petrol tank. I couldn't see much flame, but I reckoned it was there all right. I remember looking once at my left hand, which was keeping the throttle open. It seemed to be in the fire itself, and I could see the skin peeling off, yet I had little pain. Unconsciously, too, I had drawn my feet and one of my parachutes on the seat to escape the heat. Well, I gave the Hun all I had, and the last I saw of him was when he was going down, with his right wing lower to the left. I gave him a parting burst, and as he disappeared, I started thinking about saving myself. I decided to jump up into my seat. But first of all, I hit my head against the framework of the hood, which was all that was left. I cursed myself for the fool, pulled the hood back, and I relieved my split rescue, and jumped up again. Once again, I found the same place. I forgot to undo the straps holding me in. One of them snapped, so I had only 3 to undo. Then I left the machine. I suppose I was about 12 to 15,000 feet when I got out. Immediately I started somersaulting down, and after a few turns like that, I found myself turning head first to the ground. After a second or 2 of this, I decided to do a lift. The ground was dying in straight down and began to burst down. Then an aircraft, a Messerschmitt, while I was coming down like that, I had a look at myself. I could see the burns of my left hand showing through the knuckles. Then, for the first time, I discovered I'd been wounded in the foot. Blood was oozing out of the lace of my left shoe. My right hand was pretty badly burned too. So I hung down a bit longer, and then decided to try my limbs, just to see if they would work. Thank goodness. When I got lower, I saw I was in danger of coming down to the sea. I knew I didn't stand a mercy if I did, because I wouldn't have been able to put the stroke with my hands like that. But I managed to float in land. Then I saw a high-tension cable below me, and thought it would finish me if I could tell. Fortunately, I was traveling towards the 9,000 feet. When I was about 100 feet from the ground, I saw a cyclist deserting ring his brother. I was surprised to hear the bicycle down, and realized I was coming down that through fast. I bellowed the cyclist, but I don't suppose he heard me. Finally, I touched down in the field and fell over.
Seeing 7 of these 8 aircraft airborne again later, hopefully, as part of the big wing to close the show. The aircraft from the Tochner Flying Museum, the Essential Museum of Tochner in the Czech Republic, unfortunately had to leave early due to concerns about the weather intervening in getting home. warbird experience of Hurricane 10, based at the Big Hill Heritage Hangar in Second Inn, then it's Hurricane 50 by Reprotec at their facilities in Sussex. And last into land will be the Battle of Britain Veteran Mark I of Hurricane Heritage. And our thanks to the pilots who flew that unprecedented stunning Dan Griffith, Dave Harvey, Alex Smith, Matt Pettit and James Brown, our 8 Hurricane pilots in our opening salute to the Battle of Britain. Now, what's Duxford got to do with the Battle of Britain? Well, RAF Fighter Command split into 4 groups, numbers 10, 11, 12 and 13. Duxford was part of number 12 group, which took in the East Coast and the Midlands, and it was a sector station, which is still a part of the museum here. It's worth recalling that Duxford's legendary station commander during the battle, Group Captain A.B. Woody Woodball, was himself a fighter controller. Radar stations to Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory, and then on to the group headquarters and the sector stations like Duxford, where the operations room staff would vector the fighters towards the progress of German raids and the positions of RAF fighters going after them. The main Luftwaffe single-seat fighter of the battle was the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the endurance of which wasn't great. They could manage to a few minutes dogfighting over British soil.
One runner does very
As penetration, they could spot for field artillery, they could provide close air support, and they could strengthen monoplane fighters to replace the biplanes. And this lovely Hawk 75A1, stationed initially in France, then during the Battle of France. To go a little bit forgotten in modern times. For example, prior to the Battle of France really starting, the first Allied aerial victories on the western front of the world were scored by French transports. Top speed and its armament were all inferior to the likes of the PF-109, which were And we saw the Wildcat taxiing back to the coming down to that aeroplane. So that. Represented by this Mark 1F, the fighter. It was turned into a long-range fighter with a conventional gun pack of 4.3 round machine guns, augmenting the standard armament. And when war broke out in 1939, the RAF's first offensive action hostilities involved Leonards. Saw the first collectible display from John Remain. And now we have another great multi-engine B-17G flying fortress known as Sally B. Aviation Engineering Spitfire. About Sally B. Its 50th anniversary display season in private operation in the UK, the only B-17 flying fortress flying in Europe today, and an aeroplane that means so much to so many of us. As a B including members of the of course, which feature again the TV series I saw about in this particular area. Flying out to exact there. It's called the Frank invasion at the time. help keep this aircraft flying, but also to its operator, Ellie Salaklo, without which, quite simply, this aeroplane would not be in front of us now. My captain, Peter Guidance, and co-pilot Paul Schluer. Indeed, the type started out being known as the Tempest Light Fighter. Well, when World War II ended, the RAF no longer had a requirement to indicate that the jets were coming. But for the Fleet Air Arm of the Royal Navy, development of the design as the Sea Fury continued. P-47 Thunderbolt now running in. Starboard inner engine panel international military participation to Duxford, and we're about to see some of it now. And in fact, since 1st of June 1940 and the day, 8th of May 1975, 752 Belgians served their crew in the RAF, and 622 combat forces and 207 helicopter on the Belgian Air Force. Sometimes we've had Belgian military participation in one of our shows. In fact, I think it's maybe 30 years since we last saw them in the flying display here, and we've never seen them excited in the show this. And they come here, this helicopter and its crew, 40 squadron at Brookside, to salute the 29 Belgian pilots who were part of the RAF in wartime, risers to some 1,900. 4 Belgian pilots were awarded the Distinguished Service PSO, 61 pilots were the recipients of one or more Distinguished Flying Crosses. And it's quite appropriate to see a search and rescue demonstration from this helicopter because the origins of search and rescue, or air-sea rescue as it was known at the time, can be dated back to about Britain when there was a need to recover down there from the English Channel and the RAF and the Royal Navy established for provisional air-sea rescue service. Not, of course, with helicopters in those days, with high-speed launchers, those crash boats, submarine walrus amphibious aircraft, and other types like the Hurricanes and Spitfires as well, who acted the spotting role with the dropping rifle survival gear. Well, now we see a modern representation of search and rescue from this NH-90 NFH NATO frigate helicopter, the maritime version, so the TTH, the Technical Transport helicopter, Belgium currently operates. Which More than 500 NH90s have been delivered to customers around the world, or indeed when undertaking the sort of hazardous search and rescue missions we are about to see simulated. So we see the NH90 coming into display centre and deploying the rescue diver from a 65-metre line. The helicopter at about 100 feet above the ground. They largely conduct search and rescue missions around the Belgian coast, but they also operate over land, of course, on medical evacuation sorties, in support of civil emergencies, performing vital organ deliveries, and sometimes to neighbouring overseas countries. And on average, the squadron, alongside, conduct some 100 to 150 rescue missions a year. On board, typically a crew of 5 for SAR operations, 2 pilots, 1 cabin operator who also operates the winch, and as we've seen deployed onto the grass in front of us, 1 diver and 1 medic. And we can see the rescue scene being denoted by way of a flare, which seems to... The undercarriage coming down, and the helicopter will turn back inbound in order to undertake the recovery. Diver being hoisted out of harm's way. But a roughly 10 knot ground speed forward transition being initiated by the helicopter to head towards the medic. And even on this rather breezy day, these conditions are somewhat benign compared with those they often encounter on actual rescue operations. I'm sure he'd appreciate one back, because there remains the open door of the helicopter. service. It has incredible history and preservation. Into the ownership of a very hero today on the American Warbird Gordon Flaskett of California, that was first painted in Florida. It allows us to tell another facet of the Mustang story, because this is Flight Sergeant Jack Garnes. Crookshank's injuries were so serious that he would... Another good friend we were watching earlier. The stories of heroism attached to the Swordfish during the Second World War, the Legion. This in no small part due to the aircraft's unsuitability, one might say, for a modern conflict all the time. In fact, it could easily be argued that the Fleet Air Arm should never have gone to war with an aircraft as outdated as the Swordfish at all. Question on the leading role. But it's that, as we're seeing here, its flying quality in the case of the attack that disabled the Bismarck and allowed the home fleet to gun. So slowly that the Bismarck's flak guns found it difficult to attack the light planes. The Bismarck's guns struggled in many cases with placing targets, which was a bit of a surprising drawback that was rectified later on the likes of the Tirpitz. At the time of D-Day, they laid smoke screens to protect Channel convoys, and they flew night patrols to combat German E-boats and U-boats. What a piece of flying heritage this aeroplane from the Navy Wing's heritage flight is. Before it, we had a brilliant display of the Catalina from Plain Sailing's Paul Warren Wilson. Following it off under the power of the Avro Canada Orenda 14 engine. Is the Canada CL-13B Sabre Mark 6. A26C used to live here. Very much missed the display circuit. Sabre here this summer. So now it comes the Vampire. RAF Vampire F3s stationed at Odeon and led by number 50 Squadron. The reason for that is that the Norwegians had 62 Vampires. They were Norway's first jets, used for air defence, ground attack and training duties. Squadron markings on one side. That squadron converted to the Vampire. Powered by the 360 horsepower engine, sorts of Soviet era aeroplanes for all sorts of different roles. Single seat, tail wheel equipped, the F-50 aerobatic aircraft, but still very good aerobatic quality. Thereabouts in front of us, Tom Turner in the other, the X-52 has formed up with Bill Hardesty in the 18T, and now to the motorway corner they come. And the crossover as they head towards the display centre, the solo is pulling up. Designed ruggedness and simplicity are very much to the fore. They make a good deal of use of pneumatics to operate, for example, the engine starter, the flaps, the brakes and the undercarriage on the X-52. Back there into big formation. With Western Assembly. Of the Royal Air Force Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. as well. Got me Paul White, his crew, the Battle of Bristol Blenheim Mk IF. 15 Spitfires, 7 Hurricanes. We offer our Prime Minister Winston Churchill with the pay tribute
The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout so much old, by so many, to so few.
Largest one of these that we had ever mounted, and as so often there's an aircraft we haven't seen before in it. In fact, it's the first British Airshow display post-restoration flight back in 2007. But here come the other Spitfires for the break. Service with number 19 Squadron, 1938. It's always a huge pleasure to see so many of the Supermarine fighter in the UK, but the vast majority of the fully 15 Spitfires that we saw in today's show are based here at this airfield today. Far too many aircraft, of course, to once we got all the aircraft back on the ground, we credit the operators and the pilots. Without the efforts of the ground crew, many of whom are volunteers, and those who maintain these aircraft away from displays, we would not be able to put on spectacles such as this. So our enormous gratitude goes out to all of those men and women. As the last few aircraft make their way across the threshold at the western end into land, let's run through all the aircraft and pilots who've just flown for you in that magnificent big wing. In the aircraft restoration company's Bouchon, flying solo was John Romain. In the Hurricane Heritage 2-seat Hurricane was Mike Collett. In the Biggin Hill Heritage Hangar, Hurricane Andy Monk. Hurricane 501's aeroplane was in the hands of Trevor Duggan, and the Historic Aircraft Collection